Welcome to the Shadow and the Fleur-de-Lis. Today, I'm at a war memorial, and the reason for it is that people have asked me, why do you call it Armistice Day when it's Remembrance Day? Well, I have a story that I will tell you. So please join us on our journey. Remembrance Day is always a time of year where I do lots of reflection. I personally recognize it as Armistice Day, as that is how I was raised. We are all products of the world that we grow up in, being influenced greatly by those we love and admire around us. This is a personal story. In my case, both my grandfathers and their brothers served in the Great War. My grandmother's brothers also served, both in the Canadian and British military. Each year I also find more cousins and distant cousins who also served in this one conflict alone, with several never returning. One curse of doing genealogy is it adds more reflection on how they lived and died, and what would have happened had they survived. It also makes you reflect on who or if I would be had my grandfathers not survived. As you get older, you realize what you were taught was not the whole thing, as veterans only discuss the good or funny things and keep the deep, dark secrets to themselves. I'm not a veteran of any military conflict, but did serve in the Black Watch of Canada as a youth, and then with the cadet instructor cadre being a coach mentor for youth. I did, however, spend 33 years as a frontline police officer in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in rural Canada. I will start with my father's father, Lawrence Booth, my grandfather. He was a young man in Leeds, England when the Great War started. At the start of the war, Lord Kitchener created a recruiting campaign to get local population to sign up en masse. The idea was that if he can get a sizable army raised in a short period of time, then the war would be over before Christmas. Well, at least that's what they were told. These became the Powell's regiments. My grandfather signed up with the Leeds Powells and was quickly marched to the Yorkshire Moors, where they commenced training. His brother was injured in training and was transferred to a different unit. My grandfather ended up being sent to Egypt to defend the Suez Canal from the Turkish military. Eventually, this unit was transferred to the Western Front and found themselves in the middle of a quagmire. The British generals decided on a mass attack on the German fortifications, and the Powell's regiments were pushed into the middle of this. The Battle of the Somme had commenced. They huddled in their trenches on that fateful morning, and when the whistle blew, they climbed over to the top to approach the waiting Germans. The artillery barrage had not been as effective as they predicted, and the Germans were waiting with the machine guns ready for the attack. Only within a few minutes, 15 officers were killed, 10 wounded, 233 other ranks killed, and 271 wounded. But the British Army pushed forward with little ground gained during that offensive. The regiment was devastated. A few years later, at the end of the war, of the original 900 Leeds Powells, only around 150 returned home. During World War II, he volunteered as a night watchman and feared that Germany was going to invade England. Jean Booth, my grandmother, survived raising a family during the war with food rations and wearing an ID bracelet in the event she did not survive a German bombing raid. She never spoke of what she had gone through. Who knows what horrors she saw or felt. My other grandfather, Bill Thrush, had been born in England but had arrived in Canada as a young boy. He enlisted with the Royal Canadian Artillery in Montreal, and after training in Valcartier was sent overseas. He had been a blacksmith's assistant, so he was familiar with horses, and he was amazed with the discipline of the British riding instructors, that every time a Canadian rider would fall off a horse, they would remark, "See how the maple leaves fall." He arrived on the Western Front and due to his age was kept behind the lines, but after his birthday he was moved forward and arrived at Vimy Ridge the day after the Canadian attack started. He served with the 22nd and the 66th Field Batteries throughout the war and was proud of his two black mules, Jock and Molly. His primary duty was to transport shells from the rear ammo depots to the guns at the front. A lonely and a dangerous job, always being under fire from German guns. He told stories of being gassed and putting hay in the mules' feed bags to help them during these attacks. He also talked about when under heavy fire, they would drop the shells into the mud to make a quick getaway. Any close calls would have resulted of him being vaporized in an explosion, as he had witnessed with those riding with him. At the signing of the Armistice, he participated in General Currie's parade through Mons. At the end of the war, his mules were donated to a local French farmer. During the Second World War, he worked for Bell Canada in Montreal and volunteered teaching first aid to civilians in preparation for the unknown. He also had worked at Angus Shops, which built railway steam engines, but it was later transformed to build the Canadian Grizzly tank. My father's mother's brother, my great-uncle, George Burnett, enlisted with the Black Watch, the Royal Highland Regiment, at the start of the war. He served in Siberia and participated in the Battle of the Somme and numerous other battles on the Western Front. I will quote his military decorations. 2536 Acting Sergeant G. Burnett, 1st Battalion Royal Highlanders, 30th of June, 1915. For conspicuous gallantry and ability on the 25th January 1915 at Saint-Gilles. When his commanding officer, a sergeant and corporal having been killed, he established a line under a heavy fire with 9 men taking charge of the platoon and sending back valuable information. And the second one is Acting Sergeant G. Burnett, 1st Battalion Royal Highlanders, for conspicuous gallantry near Hullock on the 13th of October 1915. When in charge of a platoon, he displayed brilliant leadership in bringing up first to the German wire and under cover smoke set up an example by pulling up the stakes until severely injured. He was given a battlefield commission and as a junior officer led many men across the wire. He returned home and remained a professional officer in the regiment. During the Second World War, he was a provost marshal for a German prisoner of war camp in Lockerbie, Scotland. He retired as a major in the regiment and lived not far from where he had spent his lifetime working. My father, Gordon Booth, grew up as a young lad in Leeds, England, watching a German aircraft fight the RAF overhead, and saw both sides being shot down with only some parachutes being deployed. He met many Canadian soldiers being billeted in the neighborhood before they were deployed to France. He lived in a time of military curfew and an uncertainty of if or when the Germans would invade England. He sought safety of the air raid shelters when the German bombs fell and lost school chums. This is when the term Julius Caesar came to be, as it was the code to send British insurgents into hiding as the Germans won the Battle of Britain and had landed on British shores to occupy the country. One more day of German aerial attacks would have decimated the RAF, but Air Marshal Göring called off the attacks and saved the day. Adolf Hitler had also cancelled Operation Sea Lion, so the attack on England had lifted. One more day would have changed the history of the world. We forget that at that time, England and the Commonwealth countries alone, with France, were coming to support Poland and other countries that had started to be oppressed by the Nazi regime. My father would later join the Black Watch. After his training, he was transferred to the Cameron Highlanders and served in Egypt during the Suez Canal conflict. Ironically, the same place his father had served at the start of the Great War. He lost friends during this conflict, and upon returning to Scotland, the British Army were reducing their military assets, and he was discharged. As a result, he moved to Canada and later met my mother, which I am blessed for. My mother's brother, my uncle Eric Thresh, was born in Montreal and had moved to the USA to start a woodworking business. During the Korean War, he joined up with the United States Army and after training was transferred to Okinawa. He was part of the 29th Regimental Combat Team. Within a few days of the start of the Korean conflict, one battalion lost 495 of the 700 men in an ambush at Hadong. Another battalion lost 214 men at an ambush 70 miles away at Anai. This was on the same day. My uncle was part of the new recruits who were quickly deployed to fill the gaps of all those who had been lost in the battles. Korea was another conflict where initially the Americans and the United Nations were losing. He was scarred by the events there forever. I can relate story after story after story of my family members who sacrifice their youth and sometimes their lives. In battle, you do not fight for your country or an ideology. You fight for your life and your buddies beside you. The world politics got you into the mess, but you do not worry about that when the bullets start flying. You have more important things to worry about. I have met numerous veterans and I have friends who fought in both world wars, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Bosnia and the Balkans. I can only admire them for what they had done. They survived when others did not. But that is mostly from chance and circumstance. I also know that they also ponder that every Remembrance Day. This Armistice Day, I also remember my mother passed away yesterday. As a young girl growing up in Montreal during the Second World War, she met many a young man at community dances as a send-off for the young soldiers. Many of them were nameless to her, but she always remembered the dances and how the women workforce filled the gap after they left. She also knows that many that she had danced with never returned. Although she never discussed it, she also lived with the horrible aftermath of those who had been in combat and tried to assimilate to a civilian life, and to a society which at the time shamed them and called them weak. We now recognize that as PTSD, or occupational stress injury. She was a victim of war as much as those involved in the conflict themselves, and carried the burden of her father and her husband her whole life. I'm sure she had nightmares of her sons, daughter, and grandsons being in the military and also having careers as peace officers. Her boasting pride may just be a cover-up for her life's experiences. Nevertheless, please excuse me if I continue to call it Armistice Day. That is what my family called it, even though we do remember every sacrifice in every conflict. We also have to remember it was simply an armistice. Had it been a total surrender by the German army on the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month in 1918, then maybe we would have not had the Second World War. Had Allies accepted the independence of their former colonies after the Second World War, maybe we would not have had Korea or Vietnam. Everything has a domino effect. This year, I ask every citizen who enjoys their freedom to reflect on what others have done to secure their lifestyle they have today. At the going down of the sun, we shall remember them.